Hello, everyone, and welcome to the New Jersey Cannabis Training Academy's Instructor Q&A. If you are watching this video, this is a instructor question and answer with our CTA instructors to talk about their specific course and their specific subject matter expertise. This has been an ongoing series where we've been organizing with all of our 25 instructors to talk about their specific level and their specific course of our technical assistance program. Before I talk about and introduce and bring on our speaker for today, just a few couple housekeeping items. For those that have not been able to join or have not joined or seen our other instructor Q&A sessions, all of our recordings with our instructors are posted and shared under the media catalogs of the Cannabis Training Academy. All you have to do is log into the portal, go up into the media catalogs section, look under the instructor Q&A catalog, and you'll be able to see all of the recordings that we've done with our instructors. So don't worry if you have to drop, don't worry if you've missed this. All these recordings will exist within the portal, and you'll be able to catch up and listen in from our instructors as well. So happy 2025. This is a very important, very important instructor Q&A with one of a well-known and well-respected union representative, one of the big union bosses, I think, in the state of New Jersey. And of course, and a very humble person too. So if you're watching this, if you're participating with us, this is level 7, focus on labor peace agreements and negotiating with unions and dealing with unions. As some of you know, and if you've gone through the technical assistance program and are in level 7, you will have known that you are going to have to deal with unions if you are trying to go for a cannabis business license. And when you're operating, should you get a license, you're going to have to deal with unions and make sure that your workers are secure, taken care of, and protected. This is applicable to all standard license and micro licenses. You don't have to have a peace agreement, but if you have a standard license, you're going to have a peace agreement too. So before I start though, before I even begin, I see that our host, Precious, has joined us back. And so I will be able to pass it back to you, Precious. We are recording, and so I will kick it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tawhid. Hi, everyone. Your host is back, Precious, ready to get back into our level 7 Q&A, as Tawhid said. First and foremost, Happy New Year, and it's 6:05, so we will get started. Welcome to our live Q&A. As always, just going to go through our run-through of what to expect this evening. The Q&A chat box is open, so is the regular chat box, so please feel free to go in there and introduce yourself. We want to know where you're dialing in from. And if you want to, you got any wins that you want to celebrate on your cannabis journey, feel free to drop that in there, and we'd love to shout you out during this time. If this is your first time here, welcome. We know that the cannabis industry or just pursuing a license or a business can be quite challenging. That's why we created the New Jersey Cannabis Training Academy to assist. We know there's several people on this call. You can be in different stages of the application process, and that is okay. The point of our Q&As is to bring a more fleshed out approach to where you are in your process. And today's super exciting because, as Tahi said, we have the boss, okay? We have one of the titans of industry, especially when it comes to labor peace agreements, which is so important, especially in New Jersey, and we'll get more into that. So our goal here with the Q&A is really to help you get closer to your dream of submitting an application for adult use cannabis license. So in a moment, which we already have here, we have Hugh Giordano from UFCW here. I'll allow him to introduce himself in a second. You'll get to meet him and hear about his course. Again, we are going to keep this conversation tailored to our level 7 course on labor peace agreements. We will try to talk about other topics, but we want to keep the conversation here. If you have not reached this level in the CTA, it's all good. You can always go back into the portal and watch it, but we will be talking heavily about labor peace agreements. We'll go through our pre-submitted questions that we received from students, as well as some conversations that I've been wanting to have with Hugh. But again, the chat box is open and our Q&A is open. So feel free to drop any questions you have for Hugh in the chat box. As we go through, one second here. Yeah, feel free to drop your questions in the chat box. And without any further ado, Hugh, I will pass it to you. Would love to give the people introduction and tell us a little bit about your level.
Sure. Hello, everybody. I'm sure most of you have seen me or heard of me or talked to me, probably attended council meetings with you. My name is Hugh Giordano, and I am a labor union representative for the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, UFCW. I have been a labor representative going on almost 24 years now. So I am pretty in tune to labor relations, relations with management, lower management, owners, and of course the workers. Uh, this course talks about the labor peace agreement. It goes through what you will expect in the labor peace agreement, things to important points of the labor peace agreements and what that means to you, to the business, and the system of which that labor peace agreement is set up. I will try my best to be as factual as possible. Of course, I am biased because I'm a union rep, but I am also in tune to a lot of folks here are small business owners. They want to get the facts. You want to know how to have good relationships, how labor affects you on the local level and the state level. And the labor peace agreement is a huge part of that. So that's a little introduction of myself. I want you to know that also you can always reach out to me if you just have questions, if you want to understand something better, whether that's a phone call, an email. I'm on LinkedIn. However, I'm always here for folks. I consider small business owners working people. So any way I can help you, I want to do it for you. Okay.
Thank you, Hugh, for that lovely introduction. Again, like we mentioned, Hugh is, I wouldn't say titan of industry. Since the beginning of my cannabis journey, he was one of the first people I've met. And one thing I'll add on is like, again, the CTA is completely comprehensive. So we do have a course on collective bargaining agreements. So if you are on that small business side and you want to understand how unions will impact you and how you have to incorporate that on from a business standpoint, we do have that taught by Daniel Pierre, who is a labor attorney, and we will set that Q&A up as soon as possible. But let's dive in here because unions are so important, not just in cannabis, but like in general, but specifically in New Jersey, right? Um, Hugh, can you walk us through just like the union laws as it relates to New Jersey, what they mean, and then how it also then now impacts the cannabis industry?
Sure. So let's talk about basic unionization, how workers join a union, and then talk about how that's a little bit different because New Jersey added another component specifically in cannabis.
Okay.
So, so all workers have the right to form and join a union. It's federal law on top of state law. One of the things that I suggest that you all do is go directly to the federal website, which gives you your rights as an employer, as a worker, and breaks down the law very precisely. It's an easy read website, but you can get a lot of education through that. And the name of that website is called N as in Nancy, L as in labor, R as in Rachel, and B as in board. It's the National Labor Relations Board. So when workers want to join and form a union under the regular way on the federal law, which I
Yeah.
will let everybody know is very outdated. The law was signed back in 1935. Um, you know, this country, this world has changed. Labor has changed. Yes, and it's put into the chat, the NLRB, so that you can click on that or save that for later time. Um, Workers have to come together. They have to sign union cards and go through a union election. Now, that whole process sounds very easy, right? But it can get very messy. We all watch the news. We see what happens during that process. We see how both sides, labor and industry, can put their guard up, and usually that leads to detrimental things for both sides, for the company and for the workers. So that's the regular system of doing it. Folks have the right to strike. Folks have the right to. The employer can lock folks out. It's gets very messy. And one of the things that I think the state was very precise on is they didn't want any job actions from either side stopping production of cannabis, stopping the sales of cannabis, the manufacturing, everything in between, delivery, because a work stoppage, which could be a strike or a lockout, would do just that. And I think the state, I remember through my conversations, was very concerned about patients at the time, making sure that they have access to their medicine, but also understood that work stoppage could hurt the workers, which goes directly not for social equity. And they also wanted to make sure that any type of action wouldn't harm the business itself, specifically cultivation. Because God forbid you have some type of work action and you got plants in there, who's going to take care of those plants, right? So let me explain what the labor piece does. The labor peace agreement makes it so that a workers in the company don't have to go through an election process, don't have to go through the NLRB, and it is a straightforward process between the employer and the local union that you're working with. Once the employees sign union cards, they are then recognized by the company through a third party card check process. So there's no election. The workers use the filling out of the card as their vote. It also makes it so that there's no work stoppages, there's no strikes, no lockouts, and everything goes smoothly. So even if you have issues, there's processes within the LPA to handle it so that neither side is harmed. So the so Jersey passed that law to have labor peace requirements so that the industry wasn't harmed and neither was the workforce, and it was a streamlined process. And that's why we have LPAs on a New Jersey level.
Thank you for breaking that down too, because unions do sound very, I won't say complex, but sensitive rather, right? Because you have to think about the company and then you have to think about the workers' rights. And both people want to succeed, right? Companies want to be able to support their workers grow, and workers want to feel protected no matter, whatever the case it is. They need that level of security. So it feels like it's just striking that balance to build an agreement together, but there are steps. I want to dive into like what a new cannabis entrepreneur, because having a LPA is part of the application, right? That's mandatory for us to submit to the CRC. What is the first step of even like collecting that piece of paper? And you're not even open yet. I don't even have a building yet. Like, why am I thinking about that now? And if I have to, what should I be preparing?
Sure. Well, labor peace requirements are just that. They're a requirement for your application. And one of the things that we're seeing too is on the local level, they're having their own system, which may also require a labor peace agreement. So it's kind of, in regards to your application, it's important to get talking about it early. It's not something you want to wait till last minute, because there are terms in the labor peace agreement, and you want to be able to read them. I know many folks may have an attorney. So most of the time, labor has worked with these attorneys, kind of has an understanding of what's in those agreements. But with those agreements comes an opportunity to make a relationship with that labor organization as well. And I think we all know that the local level is the most important, because you need, a resolution of support, you need property, and that in
Yeah.
itself is a huge hurdle for many people. Um, so making
Mhm.
that relationship early with the union and having those conversations is a great thing to do in the very beginning before you even sign anything. See what that labor organization is going to
Mhm.
do to help you as well. Are they going to step up to the plate and come to council meetings? Are they going to step up to the plate and come to planning board, or zoning? Are they going to write letters of support for you on the local level and on the state level? To see what that labor organization is willing to do for you. And I think what you should do is put the ball in their court. Have that labor organization tell you, so that you're not just yeah, yeah, yeah to death, right? If you give
Right.
them what you want, oh yeah, yeah, we'll do that, we'll do that. Like any negotiations, you want to make sure that you're getting with a good partner, someone who's going to step up to the plate for
Yeah.
you. So I think building that relationship first is the most important thing. Get to know your labor rep. You know, we're all
Mhm.
humans, and I always tell folks all the time, don't watch HBO and Showtime and think that's what a union guy is. It's not, or a woman. It's not. That's not how it is. It's this is real life. And I think having a relationship, having a cup of coffee, tea, whatever, a sandwich together is a great way to start the relationship before you even talk about the LPA.
Yeah. No, that's interesting you say that too in terms of like that building of relationships because when you're first putting your application together, it really is just that, like, right, relationships. You need to work with your engineers, you need to work with your zoning boards, your council, all these like real life people to put together these processes to put together your application. I want to talk about just sort of what the industry looks like now. I'm going to dive back and forth between what an applicant needs versus what really happens because I feel like that gives perspective, right? Let's talk about a full-fledged company that is unionized and working in cannabis and workers are happy. Like, what benefits are you seeing coming from those workers who have been, entered a union? The company's been running now for a couple years. What are we hearing from them?
Sure, that's a great question. You know, I think it's important for everybody to know that this entire model is historical. Unions in cannabis. It was an SNL skit back in the '80s. It was totally something that was never thought of. So it's all new. Um, in the beginning, because it was new, a lot of employers didn't know how to handle this because they never dealt with labor, they never dealt with unions. The workers are younger, I would say, than most. So for a lot of times, this was their first job. So working in the industry was new to them, and working with unions was new to them. So it was an education. It was a relationship building, in the very beginning. you know, I think that one of the things you'll see from employers that have, negotiated a union contract and went through the process, you'll see a lot of the same faces at those employers. You'll see a lot of the same workers that are still in the cultivation site, still in the dispensary. In fact, many of the workers
Mhm.
that I have seen over the years, for example, were a part-time bud tender, and now today they're managers. Um, I think the one thing that it builds for you in unionization is longevity. I think any business owner knows, that turnover is a huge problem in this industry. Um, Specifically because when it first started, there was no talk of benefits such as healthcare, dental, vision, prescription. There was no talk of, retirement funds and pensions. These were things were never really talked about. A lot of people were just excited to get in the industry on both sides. They were happy to get their 40% discount and say, I worked in cannabis. But we're seeing that as this, industry starts to progress and mature, people want to make this a career. So what I will tell
Mhm.
you as employers is that unionization brings stability. If the workers sit down with the employer and they negotiate a union contract, that means that they had say in what their career will look like as well. And it's not just wages, it's not just money.
Yeah.
It's everything, it's working conditions,
Yeah.
it's time off, and with a union contract, since those workers are there for a year, 2 years, 3 years, some of them now 4 years, um, you know, even longer than that, some of them, you'll see that you'll have the same faces, which brings uh, a sense of relaxation to your mind. Because as an owner, you can't be there every day. You have other things you need to do, business you need to handle, and it's good to have workers that care just as much about your company because they know that they're growing with it. So it can
Right.
bring that stability to you.
And going back into like what you need for your application in terms of like what unions can provide in terms of that stability, you mentioned is like relationship building. Like, what can entrepreneurs identify to choose the right partner for their workforce? Like, you talk about meeting you, but what kind of questions should we be asking you when we meet a union rep?
Sure, that's a good question. Well, first, I want all the employers to know that if you're looking for a bona fide labor union, I would contact your state AFL-CIO. So the AFL-CIO, and if you want to put that in the chat, it's the NJ AFL-CIO.
Mhm.
Um, they are kind of like the cathedral of unions. So they are they and what they do is they set jurisdiction for industries and for unions. So if you want to get a clear answer of who to contact, depending on what part of the state you're in as well, they will send you to the right person.
Mhm.
Um, when you're talking with a labor representative, you want to get the feel of what they're like. You want to get the feel of what their organization like. Every labor union is different. It's just the way it is. Just like every football team is different or baseball
Yeah.
team, they're all different in their own way. Um, and they all have their certain style and way of dealing with employers. And what I would ask, the first question you should ask is, what does an LPA mean to you as a
Mhm.
union rep? What does it mean to you? Because we all know what it means to the employer, but I would ask them straight up, well, what do you see happening? How do you see this? Do you plan on having this type of relationship from day one? You know, ask what other facilities they represent.
Mhm.
It's important to work with a union that understands this industry. For example, I always tell people all the time, you know, any union can theoretically organize a facility, but it's important to have the right union who understands that facility, understands the industry, the
Mhm.
state, the federal level, all those things. I could organize iron workers if I wanted to, right? But
Mhm.
my union doesn't have anything to do with iron workers, so I
Yeah.
would be doing a disservice to those workers, and the employer would be getting uh, the lack of support that they need because they had nothing to do with the industry, right? Because I had nothing to do with iron workers. So I think having those straightforward questions and asking them what they have done to support other applicants.
Mhm.
And it's more than just signing papers. Like
Yeah.
I said in the beginning, are they going to have a physical presence in the journey of your application cycle? And if you don't get that, I would be concerned because you need that support.
Yeah.
You do. I mean, especially for the small business owners, it's hard enough
Very-
to hire an attorney or a consultant. Money's coming out your
Yeah.
pocket 24/7. So the union rep should do it because it's the right thing to do. The union rep should not charge you a dime for any of this process.
Mhm.
Um, they should be doing it because it's helping your business get open and creating good jobs. So I would ask those questions straight up.
That's a great explanation, Hugh. Thanks for that. And again, for everybody, I know there's a question that came in the chat. We're going to get to those momentarily. So please keep dropping your questions in the chat and we'll come back and we'll get those answered. I always find unions like just so interesting, right? The relationship between unions. Because you're right. You watch HBO Showtime, they're like, call your union rep. And it's like this voice in the sky. You just think they have a tuxedo and a hat on and comes in and stuff like that. And you, Hugh, you're just so chill. But I want to talk about the side that sometimes people don't like to talk about, which is negotiating disputes. We've seen them happen. Cannabis is a difficult industry to work in sometimes because, like you said, there's high turnover, right? How companies operate, their budgets, things can happen. And that's just with any business, any industry, but specifically with cannabis,
Mhm.
things hit the fan. So, how does then a union really help during those difficult times with disputes between employer and workers? And any experiences or stories that you have that showed a good outcome coming from that? Or maybe a
Sure.
not so good outcome, and maybe that's just how the cookie crumbles sometimes.
Yeah. I will say this, the labor peace agreement is not a collective bargaining agreement, so it's not a union contract, but there are rules in there for both sides, to follow. An example of a rule is non-disparagement, right? So as a union rep, I can't come and talk to the workers and say, you should join the union because your boss is a bad person or this company does bad things, right? I can't disparage you. I can't disparage management, can't disparage ownership, can't disparage the brand. Um, Same goes on the employer side. The employer can't disparage the union, they can't threaten, coerce, anything like that. You join the union, you're fired type of stuff.
Right.
I have, and I'm sad to say it, in my career and even in cannabis, I've seen employers break the law. They threaten workers. They talk very ill about the union itself, not necessarily like me or any other rep, but just about the union. Um,
Mhm.
and in your labor peace agreement, there's a section in there, and you should make sure it's always in there because if it goes to the labor board, if the union files an unfair labor charge or the company were to file an unfair labor charge against the union with the NLRB, now you're looking at you need an attorney, and God knows how long that's going to go.
Right.
Um, so in there you'll have arbitration in the labor peace agreement, and you want to have that arbitration because if there is a dispute, not just because the union wants to go after the company, but maybe the union that you chose decided I don't care about the labor peace agreement. I'm going to do what I want, right? Um, and The arbitration is important because it's an easy way to handle a situation. It's a third party, neutral party that is
Mhm.
chosen by the company and the union. So if something were to happen during the process of unionizing with workers and management regarding unions,
Mhm.
arbitration is a easier way of handling it. Going to arbitration, nobody wants to do it. Actually, it makes me sad as a human to get to that point. I don't like that. I'd rather sit down and talk, and that's why it goes back to relationships.
Mhm.
Something in the moment might be heated, but if you have somebody that you can talk to, rely on, and is telling the truth, or as much as they know is the truth, like I think you'll be okay.
Yes.
Um, so arbitration is important to have in your labor peace agreement because if you don't have that, then it's going to go to the National Labor Relations Board and you're dealing with the federal government.
Actually, this might tie into a question I see here. I don't know if it's directly correlated. It's from Nicole. She said, will you be using the NJ State Board of Mediation to certify the card checks like the agriculture workers did? And I'm not too familiar with that, but is that something you can?
Sure, that's a good question. That's a great question. Um, so if you have an LPA with a union,
Mhm.
you won't have to go to the State Board of Mediation. But you can use and let me because it's kind of that's a good question. So
Mhm.
the State Board of Mediation, in the way it was used in New Jersey, was used because uh, the labor union that organized the workers in the cultivation site
Mhm.
um, did not have an LPA with that company.
Mhm.
Okay, so it was Local 152 in South Jersey organized a place that was non-union, the harvest and cultivation team, and they had to go through the State Board of Mediation. Now, why is that? Because under the National Labor Relations Act, there are some workers that are not allowed to join a union. And go figure, in this country, agriculture workers are not allowed to form a union. I wonder why.
That's
So,
insane. You know, I did not know that.
yes. So the states have to now the federal law doesn't prohibit the state from passing labor laws that add on to the Labor Act. Okay. So New Jersey did two things. In the state constitution, it says all workers have the right to organize. All. Okay. So when a group of workers that don't have an LPA and don't have a process to do a card check, if they organize, they would then have to go through the state board of mediation and have it certified, because the state does recognize agricultural workers and does have that availability for them to show that they have a majority support. If you have an LPA with a union, if you have a cultivation site, all that whole shebang, you can use the state board of mediation if you want to, but you can also just use any third party neutral, right? That is certified, someone you trust, on both sides. And there are agencies that have neutrals as well. So if you have an LPA, you don't necessarily have to worry about that process. It's just a simple majority, get a third party neutral card check. If you don't have an LPA and a union comes in and it's in the agriculture sector, those workers would then, and the union would have to file it with the state board of mediation and have it certified. That's a great
So in
question.
that case, do cultivation, so for folks in cultivation, they have to go that way? Is that considered agriculture, or is cannabis sort of like in its own bucket?
So under the federal law, the National Labor Relations Board has found that certain segments of the cultivation sites are considered agriculture, specifically plant touching. You're growing it, you're watering it, you're trimming it while it's alive. Now, once it gets picked, cured, once it gets to the cure process and all that good stuff, trimming, that's considered under the National Labor Relations Board, not agriculture. So in the case of an LPA, if you have an LPA, the CREMA Act and the Jay-Koenig Act make it so that it's clear that seed to sale, you have to have an LPA. Those LPAs will have terms in it to make it a clear process so that neither side is fumbling around. There's no issues. And in the LPA, it talks about once a majority is reached, that both sides will get a neutral third party to do that card check. If you don't have an LPA, that's where you'll have to go through, if it's in the agriculture world, through the state board of mediation.
Nice.
That
Thanks
was
for
a
that
great
explainer.
question. That was a great.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, she also added that the NJ State Board mediation also offers to both employees and unions arbitrations with set rate for arbitrators, free mediation services, free
Yep.
overseeing and certifying board members in stored elections. So that is a great resource. Thanks, Nicole. We definitely want, because I'm even learning a lot about it, working on the cultivation end and seeing just how, intricate it is to work with plants and what that means, and like, how that is essentially the core of the cannabis industry, right? So if those workers aren't happy or protected, or at some part, feeling made safe, we don't have an industry much now, do we? They're really the crop, the cream of the crop when you think about it.
Right.
So shout out to all of our folks who are working on the cultivation side. Quickly, I know because we talk about it again, our level 7 also talks about collective bargaining agreements. Can you just give us a high level, the difference between LPA and CBA?
Absolutely. So a labor peace agreement is just that. It's an agreement for peace between both industry and labor. It sets up a process for workers to organize, and what would happen if the workers choose to organize. It sets up access to the facility, meaning that the employer and the union will talk about, okay, you can do your visits. We're going to have it in non-work areas, meaning like a break room, a consultation area if it's big enough. You set up the terms of how the meeting will go, that the company, will have someone there to say that, we signed a labor peace agreement. We're neutral. It's up to you, the worker. There will be no games on either side. And it has dispute and conflict resolution within that LPA for that process.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a labor peace agreement is not a union contract, aka CBA. Okay, it is not. It just sets up the
The process.
tone,
Mm-hmm.
and when you get to negotiating, it sets a little bit of, hey, okay, this is how we're going to get there to the table. Once you get to the table, that's when you'll start negotiating the union contract or collective bargaining agreement. Now, that is where you're going to put into place where the workers are going to talk to their union rep, say, these are the things that I would like to see today, a year from now, 3 years from now, if I'm employed here. This is what I think. This is what we think as workers, what we want to see. And that's, yearly increases, benefits, sick time, vacation time, paternity leave, setting up holiday pay and holiday rates, all those things you're going to talk
Wow.
about, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to talk about all that. And then once the company and the union come to an agreement, the workers will then vote on that contract. At the end of the day, the workers ultimately have the say whether they think that that contract is good or not. Um, and it puts not only pressure on the company, but it makes the labor organization do their job too, right? Because we shouldn't be coming to the table just trying to bargain, a piece of crap, right? I mean, that's not why workers join a union. So it's coming to a decent agreement. Now, I want to make it clear too, no one's going to it's not like the union comes in and says, this is what I want, and you have to do it. It's good faith bargaining, it's called. So it's good faith. So both sides are going to win, but both sides are going to lose too. The union's not going to get everything they asked for, and the company's not going to get everything they asked for. But it's coming to an agreement, having the workers vote on it, and then everything is set in place, right? If the workers know what they're getting, but they know what they have to do to get that, right? They have to put their time in. If, for example, if you're there for a year, you get so many vacation days. You're there for 2 years, you get more vacation days. They have something to look forward to. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying with having stability in your workplace. If workers know what they're going to get and they know if I don't do the right thing, I'm not going to get it. you know, and there's also in the collective bargaining agreement, there's ways to handle, uh, you know, disagreements or conflicts between workers and management. So something, for example, someone's late, someone calls out too much or whatever the case may be. There's language in that union contract to say, hey, this is how we're going to handle these issues so that we can make sure we get to a decision quickly of how we're going to handle the worker or even the manager. The one thing I'll tell you to the owners is make sure that you have good relationships with your management and they understand what their job duties are too, because the workers are told by us what they have to do the right thing. It's going to be upon you because it'll save you aggravation. Because if you have a rogue manager, just like we're concerned about having a rogue worker, it's just going to cause issues. So it's good to have that connection. It's good so that's the difference between a labor peace agreement and a collective bargaining agreement. The collective bargaining agreement is something you have to worry about later down the line. The LPA is during your application process.
Yeah, sets it up. And thanks for clarifying that. Again, there's more on that on our level 7. We have a whole course on CBA, so you can kind of really get into those differences. Like we mentioned, feel free to keep dropping your questions in the chat. It's a great conversation. I want to talk a little bit more about the application because that's where, or just employers, because a lot of people on our calls are looking to be entrepreneurs, looking to own businesses. So they'll be the ones making a lot of these tough decisions, working with management, as you said. Um, in their plans or like in thinking early on, because I've seen it, sometimes you don't always have the best worker. You just mentioned it. You might have someone who's super late all the time. With cannabis, one of the things we talk about is like consumption while working. Some owners implement very strict rules around that, like coming to work under any type of influence or anything can lead grounds to termination. And I've talked to owners about this. They think about this like when building in like your company culture and what you expect from your employers, what should you really or your employees, what do you think owners should think about? Like, what do you think the kind of culture standards, specifically in cannabis, they should set to have like a safe place so that workers feel good about working there, but while still also making an owner feel good about the rules and regulations they're trying to implement to run a successful business? Like, what should we start to write down? Like, worker A who is attentive, on time, like rules around consumption. What have you seen folks who sort of planned well? How do they go about, really categorizing what their workforce looks like?
Sure. No, that's a great question.
Coming at you with all the great questions today, Hugh. I saved them for you.
no, these are excellent questions, and I'm happy that we can talk about these things because they're going to come up in a lot of your business environment. So
Yeah.
the so first let's kind of rub off what you said. The the issue with consuming under the or being under the influence at the job. There are some employers that don't care, that are consuming with their workers. Of course, off property, can't be doing it at the facility,
Mhm.
but they do, and they don't mind if the employees on their break go across the street to the Wawa and
Mhm.
hit their vape. There are
Right.
other employers that say, I don't want that at all, right?
Mhm.
So in anything type of policy and procedures, you want to make that very clear from day one. And
Mhm.
it's more than just handing them employee handbook and say, sign it, here you go, bye. Again, they're 22 years old, 23 years old, and there's lots of adults that sign things that don't even read them. They go, okay, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I would suggest having a workshop, a training workshop of what's expected. The basic things, we want you to wear your badge every day. We want you to wear our shirt every day. Again, there's other employers that say you can wear anything cannabis. I don't give a crap, right?
Mhm.
But then what happens is then you start seeing these issues with, well, it's cannabis, but you can't wear that shirt. You know what I mean? Like you have to make it very clear of what shirts they can wear, what you expect for them, for example, like latenesses and tardinesses. There are some companies that say, if you're scheduled at 11, we give everybody a 5 minute leeway. If you clock in 11:04, you won't get in trouble, right?
Right.
But in saying that, if you have those types of policies, they have to be clear, they have to be concise. You can't be, you have to let your managers know as well, because this is a big issue. You might sit down and think about these procedures and policies that you want to have, but if you don't have that relationship with your management and they're not enforcing it one way or another, then you're all over the place. Then you have turbulence, and it causes animosity amongst the workforce. So I think it's clear that you have it written out clear, your management is trained, but then you also go over it with your workforce.
Mhm.
Besides using the POS, besides using metric, all those things are very important. But if you want them to show up and act a certain way, you have to explain it to them. You have to break it down to them. If you don't, it'll just cause problems between workers and management. You'll get dissatisfaction amongst everybody.
Mhm.
And you just don't want that, because I think every employer wants to have a decent workplace for people. You
Yeah.
want them to want to come to work. Even, everybody's human. They have bad days, they're miserable, but sometimes, but you want to make sure that they know exactly what they have to do. Um,
Yeah.
so that way you don't have an issue.
Yeah, no, I find that the employers or the entrepreneurs who think about employee morale way before they even make their first hire, um, tend to even, for the long term, build like just an amazing culture around their companies. And for those on the call who are in that position or about to, launch your business or preparing, company culture is everything, right? Like, you as the owner, you're doing everything now. You're the one putting the application, talking to everybody, submitting paperwork, running finances. So yes, there is a lot of that on you, but pretty soon a lot of that work will be passed on to your workers. And you want to make sure that the standard you set for them, or the standard you show by example, will be upkept and met. So I really appreciate what you said about like right from the get. And I've heard this before in talks I've done in Maryland with folks who've been in the industry for a while. There is a big difference in how you set the tone for your workers off gate. If you're going to be that super chill boss, you have to ride that wave to the very end. If you're
Yeah.
going to be, ruling with a safe iron fist, you have to like show what that would, exude. How do you get the best out of your employers? Again, we're wrapping up soon. We have a couple more minutes. And again, drop your questions in the chat. This has been such a great conversation. I want to talk about a period in time in New Jersey cannabis where it wasn't just the unions. I think it started with the unions, maybe even UFCW, but there was a rally around cannabis workers. And I'm talking about the time where we wanted to protect or allow for workers to receive tips, or bud tenders rather, to receive tips. And that was a time here. I want to talk about that story a little bit because I don't think people on this call realize that even I sat on that CRC call and people gave testimony. People spent hours trying to find ways to support bud tenders and just support each other in New Jersey cannabis industry. And I think that effort was led really by you, Hugh, and other members of different unions who were like seeing this as a major impact for our bud tenders. And I just remember the overwhelming amount of support that showed out just to bring awareness to this situation. Um, can you talk to us a little bit about that time and just like the impact of advocacy and how that played a role watching community, unions, workers, businesses all kind of stand up for one cause?
Sure. Yes. I felt like so long ago, right?
Yeah.
The so what happened was that when it was medical only, the Department of Health was turning into the CRC, and they made a quick rule saying that um, tips are no longer allowed in the dispensaries when they've been existent since day one, and they're part of this industry on a national level. It's every state you go to, you see a tip jar. It's very rare that you won't see a tip jar. This was a big issue, not just because of the workers, right? Because the workers depend on that money. Those tips are important to them. It's gas money. It's going to the supermarket and buying some food. It's going towards their rent or whatever. It's part of the economic package. The other issue that we were concerned about was if the workers are not receiving their tips, well, those workers are now going to demand higher wages from the company, right?
Mhm.
If they were theoretically making, let's say, $24 and that encompassed their rate and their tips they were getting per hour, let's say, now they're just down to whatever their rate is. That puts
Mhm.
pressure on the companies.
Yeah.
And we had good union companies that were providing decent wages along with the tips and other benefits. Now, it was protecting the worker because they work hard for their tips, they depend on those tips, but it was also protecting the company, right?
Mhm.
And that's when I talk about speaking with your labor representative and asking these questions. It's what are you going to do for me? It's okay to
Mhm.
ask that. It's okay. Even though unions represent workers, if you don't exist as an employer, if your banner is not strong, if your banner is not making money, the workers get hurt too,
Mhm.
right? So without you, they don't exist. Without them, you don't exist, right? So you need each other. So advocacy, that is something that a labor union should do. They should step up to the plate and you should have those conversations. I mean, the workers reached out in that particular incident. The workers were the first ones to reach out, but we also had the employers reach out to us. Some of them were before they got sold out to the bigger guys, they were independents. So it wasn't like they were the big guys yet, and it
Mhm.
was going to hurt them. Um, so, unions can be there for you to help protect you too. So, you're going to have things that you agree on 100%.
Yeah.
Look, and it's all politics. I'm not saying that the union's always going to agree with the company all the time politically, but you'll find that most times you're going to come to an agreement. You'll sit down, and what I always say is that when you're working with your labor rep, find the things you agree on and run with it, right?
Yeah.
The other things that you just can't agree on, wherever the balls fall, that's it. Where that's how the game ends, right?
Yeah.
But um, advocacy is a huge part of unions.
Mhm.
It's stepping up not only for workers but for the industry that they represent as well.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
they should do that.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that because we don't talk a lot about advocacy and how important it's tied into cannabis. A lot of what we're experiencing and living in has been the work of advocates for years, calling for legalization, calling for a bigger industry, calling for patient access, even now calling for home growth. So many things
Right.
happen because people band together and lift each other's voices up. So thanks for reiterating that. And I think for those who will watch this video again, will be a great um, point. We have one more question here before I let you give some final thoughts. From Quincy, he says, for delivery side of things, what type of labor board do you need to be in contact with, and what specific licenses do you need?
Okay, so if you're doing a delivery, you would get a labor peace agreement if you're a standard delivery license. Um, you wouldn't have to go to anything other special thing.
Mhm.
If you're looking for a union, you can contact the AFL-CIO. Um, but you would just speak to the union that you think is best for the cannabis industry for your facility. And you would have the same labor peace agreement that you would have if you were a retail location, a cultivation site. So nothing special in as far as that. Um, you know, uh, Again, the terms of your collective bargaining agreement might be a little different because you're delivering, right, as opposed to retail or cultivation. But that is something that you would sit down and talk to the union about and start kind of planning that out.
Nice. Thanks for that. Great question, Quincy. All right, just to wrap things up, something I ask every instructor is, what is the advantage of taking your course?
Good question. Um, I think the first thing is knowledge, right? Understanding. Like I said, we all have preconceived notions of what someone could be or should be, or what an organization is. Um, this gives you a clear, precise way of making sure you get what you need, and you know the questions to ask. You know what
Yeah.
to see in the labor peace agreement. So these things, when an article comes up and you're reading it, you'll know exactly what that means. You won't be scared by it. Um, and by doing that, also by taking this course, it could save you money. There's a lot of times, and again, I know there's lawyers on here too. The you want to, I know a lot of especially working class people that are getting into this industry um, because they don't know. They don't have any labor experience. They never dealt with labor relations. They hire another attorney on top of the cannabis attorney. And knowing these things, what these articles mean, uh, can save you from having to go out right away and get a labor attorney. Um, so I think it's money, it's time, it saves you, and you just get a bunch of knowledge. And I don't think you'll be as scared when you're having this conversation. And you shouldn't be. It's not that scary. There's many people that have went through this experience, not only here but in other states. And it seems to be working out. The sky is not falling.
Ha, the sky is not falling indeed. Thank you so much, Hugh, for this amazing conversation. I've learned so much, and it's just always great to reconnect with you. As we told you guys, this is the boss when it comes to unions, LPAs, been in here in the game from the very beginning. So it was a pleasure having you again. Make sure you guys check out the courses. To everyone who joined us, thank you so much for spending your Tuesday with us. Just a few announcements. We do have several webinars coming down the pipeline. Every Tuesday this month, we're actually going to have a webinar, and we'll be kicking off our next webinar with community development and workforce development, and how you put that into your application. So we're super excited to have that. Again, if you have any questions, be sure to drop them into our into the portal. You can reach out to us and also email the CTA email if you have any questions. As always, everyone have a great night. Hugh, thank you so much, and we'll be back again next Tuesday.
All right. Thank you. And thanks everybody for being on.
Thank you.